Hey, everybody, welcome back to another 50 Conversations with 50 Strangers. In absolute transparency, I have to tell you, in the one of the most embarrassing moments of my this year, I had on this beautiful man that's in front of me, Rabbi Dovid Cohen, and Reb Dovid, and I had a spectacular conversation. But my machine, my beautiful computer, had been overloaded with so many conversations and so many videos that it stopped the recording, and I didn't know it. It started recording. I looked up, I saw the little recording button like I do right now, and I will be checking that throughout this conversation to make sure it's on. And it stopped recording, and we lost the whole conversation. And so he's been kind enough to set up another time, which is today, to have another conversation with me. So he's not really a stranger. This is conversation point two, because we've gone through this before, and there's some trepidation that what was a fabulous conversation may be less real because we've already gone through it. But we're going to do everything in our power to give you an authentic, real conversation based on the fact that we know each other a little bit more now. We can maybe play around a little more than we did before. So it is my honor and my privilege to introduce this stranger, who's no longer a stranger, he's like my brother now, to a group of strangers that I don't know that are listening to us that may or may not become friends. But I believe that once we open up the room and allow people to share themselves with us, that a world of strangers becomes a world of friends. And I believe we would be very well suited to have a world of friends right now. So without me blubbering anymore, Reb Dovid, welcome to the show. Welcome to 50 Conversations with 50 Strangers. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing great. Danny, thank you so much for having me back on the show. It's a difficult day in Jewish tradition. It is actually the day before Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of the month of Av, which is the second to last month on the Jewish calendar. The ninth of Av is a day where we, the Jewish people, commemorate the tragic events of the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem, as well as many other calamities that we've experienced in Jewish history. And we're already in New York on the East Coast, we're already past midday on we call Erev, which is the day leading into this really the most terrible day on the Jewish calendar. So you catch me in a moment where I'm a little bit of a heavy heart. It happens to also be the day a year ago where one of my very close friends passed away at a very young age. So it's a little bit of a heavy day. It's an intense day. And I look forward to the opportunity to open that up and to open up the depth of what we may be able to uncover here in the next period of time.
Uh, Again, thank you for coming in so honest, so vulnerable, so real. We know each other a little, but not that much. And for you to share that in the first sentences that you say is really beautiful. And I just want to ask the listeners to look at the level of honesty and integrity that this man has. To walk into a room where we barely know each other. We had one conversation that didn't get recorded. This one is getting recorded. I'm keep checking. And to be able to share something so honest and real and vulnerable. Let's go into that if you don't mind.
We could try.
Okay, I would love it. And if it feels bad, like this is your time, so you don't have to answer anything. Okay. But when I look at the world around me, and this was one of the questions that we asked before, and we're just going to jump to it now because why go back to the conversation we already had? When I look at the world around me and I see the things that happen and I see the events that happen, now we're in a very highly charged time right now in the United States, where with the Me Too movement and COVID and the Black Lives Matter protests. But it seems to me that the world is trying to say something to us, that God is trying to say something to us through these events that happen. That um, if I can I share a story with you?
Go ahead, sure. Your
So,
conversation.
So one of the things that Rev Dovid and I share in common is we both have special needs children. And in our past conversation, we spoke about how blessed we feel, how hard that is also, and how blessed we feel by it. One of the biggest lessons my daughter taught me is she can't have a conversation like this. People
Oh,
can't understand her when she speaks. And she counts on me to understand her. And when she speaks to me and I don't understand her, I mean, I understand her most of the time, but when she speaks to me and I don't understand her, she'll raise her voice and say it louder. And she's pretty smart because I'm getting older. My ears are starting to, my hearing's starting to decrease a little, but mostly it's not because of the volume of what she's saying that I don't understand it. It's a clarity. And when she speaks without and louder and I still don't understand her, what she'll do is she'll go into a tantrum. And that doesn't happen necessarily right away. It can happen an hour later. It can happen when we're in a restaurant or at home or at a friend's house or walking the beach or walking down the street. And she'll go bizarro, wild, and lose it. And when I still don't get her, what she'll do after that is she'll come running at me and she'll try and attack me. She'll try and rip my shirt or bite me. And this went on, David, this went on for, I'm going to say almost 15 years. She's 30 years old now. And in the midst of my despair, I just couldn't understand how to hear her. And I wanted so much to hear her. I wanted so much to understand her. And I wanted her to know how much I loved and adored her. And I said to her in the midst of my anguish, in the midst of my despair, Elisa, I just can't do this anymore. I'm trying my best. You know how much I love you. You know how important it is for me to hear you. Can you please try and speak to me in a way that doesn't use words? Because I just can't get your words. And from the midst of her rage, she had this big smile that melted my heart. And I said, What? What's going on? And she looked at me and in perfect English, she said, I am daddy. I said, I'm sorry, you are daddy. What? Are you telling me that you are communicating to me without words already? And she went, Yes, daddy. And I said, How the heck are you doing that? And she put her finger to the side of her head like this. And I understood that she was, because she couldn't speak, it didn't mean she couldn't send thoughts. She couldn't communicate. She was sending thoughts to my mind.
mhm.
And telepathically, she was communicating to me. And I said, You little son of a gun, are you putting thoughts in my head? And she started laughing and laughing from the anguish of not being able to communicate to suddenly being able to be heard. That freedom of laughter just became contagious, and we were laughing contagiously for 10 or 15 minutes. It felt like 10 years. From that moment on, she's never yelled, she's never tantrumed, she's never attacked. If it would have ended there, it would have been glorious for me because now I knew how to communicate with my daughter. I could speak to her; she could telepathically speak to me, and I could now I believe the thoughts that I was getting because she was telling me that's what she was doing. But you know what I did? I took that same concept and I said, I wonder if that happens in boardrooms, in government. I wonder if it happens in hospitals and in homeless shelters. I wonder if it happens in prisons, and I wonder if it happens in schools. And I started to expand my reach with that concept of what she taught me into all those different places. And you know what I saw? I saw in every single situation, people do exactly the same thing. When they speak and they don't get heard, they yell. When they yell and they don't get heard, they create chaos. They try and create havoc.
Oh,
They try and mess up a situation. When they mess up a situation and they don't get heard, they destroy something. It can be a relationship, it could be an affiliation with a group, it could be a building that they blow up, it could be a town square that they shoot people in. It could be anything. And what she taught me in those few minutes after 15 years of trying to understand her was that if we would only find a way to listen to the people that are talking to us and really hear them, if we can't hear them in the way they're speaking, find another way to do it, we would alleviate most of the problems that exist. So in Tisha B'Av, it's a long question to ask a very short thing.
yeah.
Okay. Do you feel like God has been trying to say something to the Jewish people by all the trials that they've had, all the pains that they've had, all the situations that have gone on? Do you feel like he's spoken and then yelled and then tantrumed and then attacked?
It's a
And if
very, very,
so,
it's a very powerful analogy. I can definitely empathize as well. My son is relatively articulate, I guess, to me and to my wife, who hear him talk all the time. But for most outsiders, they probably have a difficult time
yeah,
discerning and deciphering what he says. So I'm very empathetic to that beautiful analogy. In terms of your question about all the trial and tribulation and the unease and the malaise that is rampant in society at large and the Jewish experience in terms of Tisha B'Av. So I wanted to actually marshal another Jewish holiday that I think could be helpful in answering this question, and that is Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year that's actually rapidly approaching in under 2 months.
yeah,
For those that are familiar with the Jewish faith, so they know that one of the key ingredients or the key mitzvah, the key commandment of the day is the blowing of the shofar. The Rambam Maimonides actually comments that part and parcel of the mitzvah of blowing shofar is what he says in Hebrew. We say, Uru Yeshenim, wake up, you sleepyheads, basically. Wake up from your slumber and from your malaise and from your basic comfort levels and from wasting the time that you're given here on this earth. Be awakened, be spiritually, uh, you know, motivated or moved, etc. So on the one hand, I thought the shofar was a beautiful analogy as well to respond to your question, because on the one
absolutely.
hand, shofar is actually a prayer that doesn't have words. It actually is, as many of our great commentators have pointed out, it actually is this medium that we're discussing vis-a-vis your daughter, vis-a-vis my son. Sometimes people can communicate on a level that's beyond words. That's a cry from the depths of the being. You describe it as telepathy, fine, however you want to describe it. But ultimately, there is this yearning for every person to be heard, to communicate their unique message. We're hearing, an array of different messages in the world today. But in terms of God speaking to the human race, yes. I mean, I don't see as a religious person any other way to understand God shaking up his world in 2020, other than to understand that he's sending each of us, whatever religion we may be part of, whatever faith-based group or not faith-based group, he's definitely asking us to reassess and to evaluate how we've been living, where we're going, and how do we want to progress from here, and how do we want to interact with each other. That's something that I think certainly goes to the core of having 50 conversations with 50 strangers, is certainly that message as well.
I, I love that, and I love the insight, and I will never forget your example of the shofar. I wish we could blow the. For those people who don't know what a shofar is, the shofar is literally a ram's horn, and it makes the sound. You blow into it, and it makes the sound of a. I don't know what would you say, almost like a horn.
I'll give you one other just since you mentioned that. So the notes that it's cute because I have a 9-year-old son who's actually a very talented shofar blower.
Wow.
And we have a few different shofars around the house. Don't ask me why. We've gotten them as gifts over the years. I don't know how to blow it myself, and my son is gearing up when he is of age. I think he'll be able to bang them out. But the notes that we blow are actually a kind of like a straight one, as we call it the tkiya, and then there's the broken ones, which are called the shvarim shru, which are like staccatos. Like we go do, and then we go do 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 do. And then we do it again. The analogy is that life starts off as a straight line, as a kind of a pathway, as somewhere where maybe we feel like we're on a path, and then inevitably in each of our lives there's a breaking point. There are kind of those short notes, and they break and we break and we're almost broken, but then we're reminded again that there is that straight path that we can come back to, which is another beautiful analogy to the time in which we're living in,
Gorgeous.
the complexity, so on and so forth.
So for those of you who are listening and can't hear the sound of the shofar, hear the message of the shofar. Because how beautiful is that analogy, and how beautiful, I don't want to say hidden in the religion, because it's not hidden. It's available for anybody who has eyes to see and ears to hear. But so many of us don't have eyes to see and ears to hear, and we go through the ritual of it without understanding the magic behind it, and the symbolism behind it, and how beautiful to understand that and follow that. If I can press you a little bit, do I have permission to?
You can go ahead, press.
And what I would love to know, because I so agree with what you said about the current times, that God is giving us a message somehow in those times. What interests me is when a people goes through so much adversity and so much tragedy and so much pain, do you think God is trying to say something to the people? And what would he be trying to say through his chauffeur, or through the constant coming back to those broken points? What is he trying to say to the people? Because you're a leader of those people right now in your congregation. What is it that the people need to hear?
So one of the great challenges of being human and being finite is the gap that exists between the finite and the infinite. So to be able to opine on what God's agenda is in any particular moment is something very challenging. And yet, as you point out correctly, particularly as spiritual leaders, as in my case, a rabbi of a congregation, so you do have to have messages of import, of inspiration, of relevance that can somehow translate world events and life occurrences in a way that's in a medium that's meaningful for people. One of the great messages, actually, counterintuitively, is that of faith, meaning that man often, one of the original sins, I borrow that term from a different religion, but at the end of the day, man tries to understand and tries to be like God. That's actually the terminology that we find in the Bible at the beginning of the book of Bereshit, that the urge, or the behind the original sin of eating from the the tree of knowledge, was man was trying to be like God, trying to understand how God operates, and what God is thinking and what God is trying to communicate at different times. And we were punished for that. That was a tremendous sin, meaning there's a message there, that there's a kind of a dichotomy. On the one hand, we have to try our best to understand God's ways and what he wants from us. We, as for example, in our religion, so we believe very much that God gave us a handbook for living, 613 commandments that we live our life by. So that's really his guidance. That's what he wants from us. When he speaks in terms of, a virus pandemic that affects the entire world, when events are clearly, when he's clearly shaking up the world. So we often fall back on two themes. One is that of repentance, of introspection, look at ourselves first, kind of see how we can improve, how we can grow closer to him. There's always a lesson there. If one starting point is the purpose of life is closeness with the Creator and emulating his perfection, so then one message always is going to be perfecting one's ways, even though we don't know exactly. Perfect examples, like we've talked a little bit about having special needs children. So okay, we've grown to appreciate that as a blessing. When it first happened, I didn't know. I don't think I thought it was such a blessing. But yet to try to understand why God gave me a child who is special or unique. So that's not such a fruitful method of thinking, because I can't discern God's ways. I don't know why he does what he does. I don't ask why, I ask what. This is a famous, in the Hebrew parlance, the word lama, which means why. If you change the vowelization, you can change it from lama to lima. Not why, but for what. Meaning God has given us a challenge. He's given us an opportunity. Now the question is, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to channel it? It's not always so much about trying to understand the deeper meaning behind it. So there is that balance that I try to communicate. On the one hand, trying to understand to the degree that we're able, at the same time, trying to move forward without being paralyzed by events.
Thank you. And again, I love your clarity. I love how you take difficult concepts and make them simple for people to understand.
Thank you.
You're an expert at that. And I want to continue the conversation. In the book that's hanging over my left shoulder, the book that I wrote called The Mosaic, it's a story about a boy who loses his parents 2 years apart on the same day. And when he asks the adults where his parents are, they tell him they're in a place called heaven. So the boy sets out in search of the place called heaven, because he wants nothing more than just to be in the unconditional love of his parents again. And he thinks along the way he'll meet the rabbis and the ministers and the priests and the swamis and the gurus and the shamans and the aborigines elders and the medicine men and women. He doesn't. What he meets is the trash man and the road worker and the blind woman and the homeless man. And he wonders, why am I sitting with these people? Like, what are they going to show me about heaven? But he hears this inner voice say, well, you're here with them. You don't have anywhere to go. Take the time, because you're here with them, and just sit with them and listen to them tell you their stories. Reb Dovid, in every single case, in doing that, what he realizes is that every single time, the person he initially came up to is not at all the person he's sitting with right now. He realizes he doesn't see people the way they are. He sees people the way he is. And when it happens over and over and over and over and over and over and over till nauseam again with all the people he meets, he says, I wonder if I see anything in the world the way it is, or if I see everything just the way I am. And he says, I wonder what would happen if I slid myself to the side and just tried to see what's right in front of me without me putting an anecdote on it. In the story, it's through a mirror maker that happens. Where
I gotta get a copy of that book, because go ahead. I didn't interrupt you, but
no, go ahead. You can go.
I think it reminds me of so many things. It reminds me of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, one of the great Hasidic masters.
To be even put in the same sentence of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, you've made my day.
And obviously The Alchemist, which I think
The Alchemist, a lot of people have compared it to, which is also
that too. Yes. So I think getting ourselves out of the way is one of the things I think about so often. This idea of the filters that we use to hear others and to experience others. Look, we're all unique, and we have to kind of use our own filters to interact with people and to experience them on our own terms. On the other hand, we get in the way so often. I think we talked about this a little bit last time, and maybe it will dovetail here a little bit as well. Just kind of the idea of those particularly who are in positions of influence, who get to have their voice heard. Right? You're giving 50 strangers the opportunity to have a voice that they don't necessarily always have. It's a very safe, wholesome space here that you've created, which is very beautiful.
Thank you.
But, ultimately, there's this idea of getting, God himself in esoteric Jewish sources constricts himself in creation of the world, because we believe that God's presence is everywhere, and therefore there should really be no room for you and I to be having this conversation, because there should be no room for us to exist. But God actually limits and constricts himself as a kindness to us to enable us to share his world with him. And this is something that we as human beings, the concept of a human being feeling haughty or feeling that there's something special. I had a funny thing happen to me, like in the heart of coronavirus, I had to go pick something up somewhere, and I pulled up to the side of the curb because there was a curbside pickup. I texted they were supposed to bring out the item. They didn't come out. I was waiting. I went out, I got out of my car. Some guy starts like yelling at me. He's like, "What do you think you're special?" Like, whatever. The guy was like out of control. I was a little nervous, but it struck me as an interesting thing. Like, do you think you're special? I mean, that's like an interesting idea. Like, really, I mean, on one hand, you have to feel good about yourself. You have to have self-esteem, and maybe that means feeling you're special. That word is overused in different contexts. Obviously, we've been talking about special needs children, what it means to be special. But on the other hand, the other side of it is getting out of our own way. I heard a beautiful analogy last summer. I was in Yad Vashem, the renowned Holocaust museum in Israel. I spent a week there with a bunch of different rabbis of different denominations. It was a fascinating experience. And one of the professors there talked about when he was interviewing survivors of the Holocaust. So he was often kind of interpreting their stories based on his own filters. Yeah. And he was gleaning that he wasn't getting what they were saying, and he was getting in the way. And this is something that I think about not often enough, but I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you wrote a book about it, because it really is this idea of we can be most powerful and impactful when we kind of get out of the way of our message on some
Yeah.
level. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense, and it just makes me want to ask the question that I've been trying to ask even more. You and I have had discussions. I was one day away from being ordained a rabbi a lot of years ago, almost 40 years ago. Perspective changes everything. And when we change our perspective, what we see changes. A well-known American inspirational person, Wayne Dyer,
Sure.
said, when we change the way we see the world we see changes. And so I love speaking to you. I want to continue speaking with you way past this conversation, if you'll have me, because I just love the perspective that you bring
Thank you. I'm flattered. Thank you.
to Judaism. And I love the way you are trying to show Judaism to the world. So much of Judaism sits in the victimhood of pain, of all the Tisha B'Avs that have happened, of all the tragedies, of all the things that have gone on. And there's a good reason for it. There's so many things that have happened. But if you follow the example of my daughter, if we speak and we don't get heard, speak, yell, tantrum, attack. What I'm trying to get at is, do you believe that this world, God, however you want to call it, has been trying to whisper, then talk, then scream, then tantrum, then attack the Jewish people with something that he wants them to get that they're just not hearing? And by that, I mean, I love it for the Jewish people because it's a small subset, but the people in general, not just the Jewish people, but all people, we're in the same situation. That if we don't listen to the speak, it'll be a yell. If we don't listen to the yell, it'll be a tantrum. If we don't listen to the tantrum, it'll be an attack. What is it we're not hearing? What is it that you personally are not hearing? What is it that the people that you represent are not hearing? And what is it that the world at large is not hearing?
So it's obviously a multi-layered, deep question, but I will say the following. And I say this frequently. I think one of the things that a parent, we'll talk about it on a level of parent-child as emblematic of the bigger God as the ultimate parent, and we, the world, universe, as all children and therefore siblings to one another. So there's nothing that I, as a parent, despise more than when my children don't get along with each other. It's something very, very painful to me. When I see I am blessed to have 4 boys and one girl. When I see my boys in particular kind of at loggerheads with each other, not being nice to each other, hurting each other's feelings, there's nothing that makes me kind of more upset. A parent wants to see that their children love each other, that they get along with each other, that we reflect the oneness of the Creator, or that we understand in the parent analogy that we're a family, that we're all in this together. That kind of human condition, human experience, you do see it in you see beautiful manifestations and expressions of it in different places. And when you see it, it's very, very motivating and inspiring. And I'll give a great example. There's his name eludes me at the moment, but there is a football player on the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's an offensive lineman, and he recently spoke out. There was a whole bunch of, unfortunately, hate speech of an anti-Semitic ilk against my people, and he basically spoke to his black brethren and saying that we don't raise ourselves up by stepping on by other people. That's not how we raise ourselves up. And he's been educating himself in terms of the Jewish faith and practice and principle. And the overriding principle, I think, ultimately is that we as human beings, no matter what color, no matter what creed, no matter what race, at the end of the day, there's so much more that binds us than divides us. And we're in this together. The pandemic affects every single person on different levels and different layers. And we get lost sometimes in the noise, in the personal needs, in putting ourselves first, in feeling that we haven't got what we needed, and therefore we have to, like the analogy you use, we have to scream, we have to be heard, we have to step on other people, But if there's anything that I'm pretty confident that God doesn't want, and I can't say for sure, obviously, but I'm pretty confident. I know within the microcosm of the spiritual period that we as Jews are in right now, where we mourn over the loss of the temple, one of the things that we harp on is brotherly love toward each other, to have baseless love instead of baseless hatred. That's certainly an idea that can be extrapolated to the world at large. And it's very inspiring when you see it. You do see outreach from the Black community to the Jewish community and vice versa. And I think that's more the rule than the exception. I think it really are. And you see Muslim and Jews in different sects working together. And there is definitely movements of people that want to espouse this ideal that I am expressing right now. It just hasn't fully spread just yet. And that's something that I think we have to continue to work on. I once heard a beautiful quote. It was something to the effect of, there are none so blind as those who will not see. I forgot who we're stealing that from, but the idea is that sometimes people refuse to see. Sometimes people are just so ingrained in a hatred and a pettiness, in a misinterpretation or misconstruing of history, or not understanding or not being well educated enough, that they unfortunately proliferate hatred and pettiness and enmity. And we need to live in a world where there's people who are more educated, where people are more open. Again, these are all messages that are critical, that are coming to the fore in the challenging times in which we live.
I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and there was a group called Yes, and they had a song that had a line that said, "Don't surround yourself with yourself, move on back 2 squares." And it makes me think of that song now, because maybe a kinder, more benevolent way of looking at it is that when we continue to just see what we see and don't get out of our own way, we'll always just see what we see. We go into silos of people that continue to see the world like we do, so we feel good about ourselves, and we strengthen our silos. But the silos now are getting bigger and stronger, and the spaces between them are getting wider and deeper. And it's time. God didn't create the world with silos. He created beautiful open fields and meadows and mountains and hills for us to be able to experience the world without carrying a border around us, or
The joke is that, like people say, and I think it's fairly accurate in the world of social media, for example. So if you have thousands of friends on one of the platforms, and you espouse a position, and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, great idea, yeah," like, you're preaching to the choir. Like, there isn't often enough diversity within the people that we interact with, where we have open conversations, where we genuinely disagree. I think one of the realms we see this in often is in marriage, interestingly enough. The beauty of institution of marriage, and something I spend some time doing, working with couples and trying to help solidify their marriages. So you find often that it's the one relationship where you're often kind of bound together with somebody who is not a carbon copy of yourself. And you have to learn how to negotiate differences, different viewpoints, and it's a perpetual experience throughout life. And it's very beautiful in terms of how it's a beautiful model of how we can influence, and the give and take we have with somebody who's different than we are.
Yeah.
And I think that can actually be a model that we can take to interactions with others in the world at large. And now, obviously, the stakes aren't always as high. It's a little bit of a loose analogy. But that being said, I think there are lessons that can be learned.
Yeah, well, I mean, and from our children, look what my daughter taught me of this speak, yell, tantrum attack. I mean, that I'm clearly taking that out into the world. I'm taking that into government. I'm taking that into schools. I'm taking that into hospitals. I'm taking that into religion. I'm taking that into homeless shelters. I'm taking it into into boardrooms, and I'm just watching how everybody does the same thing. When they speak and they don't get heard, they yell. When they yell and they don't get heard, they tantrum. When they tantrum, they don't get heard, they attack.
Right.
And it's just fascinating to me that a 30-year-old developmentally delayed kid could teach that to me, when I've sat with some of the wealthiest, wisest, and most influential people in the world at their dining room tables in their living rooms. And I've sat with them and had conversations and shared with them. And yet my daughter, who's delayed, taught me those things.
Mm.
It's just absolutely so beautiful.
It's Robert. It's I think Robert Frost, if I'm not mistaken, wrote The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
It's the idea that when you and
M.
I are
Scott Peck. M. Scott Peck.
okay. Also, we have the ability on some level to get some insight into seeing the world differently,
Yeah.
and that's something that's very unique and serves us well because you're right. Most people tend to do the same things and the same types of behaviors, and one of the secrets to success, I think, is to see things a little bit differently, to do things a little bit differently. If you look around all the great success stories, you'll often see that they didn't do things the way everybody else did them.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I've always been different. I think one of the questions I asked you before was, do you feel like you are fit into the world, or do you feel different? So let's ask that again.
So I think I told you last time. I told you it's something that my wife and I often discuss in the sense that she, having grown up, interestingly, my wife grew up a little girl in Vienna, Austria, in the I guess 1980s is when my wife grew up, 1980s, 1990s, and then coming to America for high school without her parents. Kind of, she spoke English because her mother is American. She also spoke German, and acclimating to American culture, American society. She kind of always felt like she didn't fit in. She didn't fully fit in. And even in her career path, like she ultimately became a midwife, and she's very much
Well,
focused on the natural birthing process. Again, like she's definitely like an original thinker or a unique person, and definitely has her own unique style and a unique flair, which part of the reason I was attracted to her. On the other hand, is part of the reason why I pull my hair out at times because like do things that everybody else does them. So this tension is something that I think I'm probably more of a classical fit in type of person. Like kind of grew up in the Jewish community in New York, went to pretty much the standard educational institutions that my peers that I tend to interact with, a similar type of experience, like a modern Orthodox day school, sometimes studying in Israel. I went to Yeshiva University, which is like the flagship Jewish college institution, so on and so forth.
yeah.
So there isn't so much about my experience that makes me, particularly unique or different uh, than others. So we tend to have that interesting blend in our relationship of kind of the insider and the outsider and kind of negotiating that. And I think we've each grown over the years from the influences of each other in that realm.
Was she brought up Orthodox, or was she a Bali Tshuva?
No, she was brought up Orthodox. Her father was the chief rabbi of Austria,
Wow.
chief rabbi of Vienna. So she grew up in a rabbinic family with an open home that basically hosted, the who's who of the non-Jewish and non-Jewish world in terms of people who came through Vienna. Vienna is a certain type of hub in certain ways, at least, for different people and different. Just an interesting thing. Just the head of the Israeli Mossad today. Uh, his name is Cohen. I forgot what his first name is, and they say that potentially could be a future prime minister. So he actually also is a special needs child, parenthetically, and he actually spent a number of Shabbatot, a number of our seventh day of rest on Saturday in my in-laws' home. He was
Wow.
stationed in Vienna. They didn't know who he was. The guy in the embassy in Vienna, they had no idea. It turns out today he's head of Mossad. Just for example, there are a lot of people my father-in-law, as a representative of the Jewish community in Vienna, he interacted with the Dalai Lama, all these interesting people that he had encounters with at different stages of his career.
Fabulous. One of the most beautiful cities. It's gorgeous there. My wife, I was married before my wife passed away of terrible cancer. She was not Jewish. Uh, she was from Sutro. So she was from the part of Italy that was actually Austria before a concession in the war made it Italy. But
Interesting.
she was Austrian. And um, this is going to blow your mind. It was on a trip to her family's home that we went to see her grandmother. And her grandmother lived on the seventh floor of the apartment building we were in, with top floor with no elevator. And she was 70 years old, so strong. And as we were walking up the steps to see her, my wife saw a woman coming down the steps and said, "Guten Tag, Frau Mengele." And I said, "I'm sorry," and I let them pass. And I said, "I'm sorry. Did I just hear you say Frau Mengele?" And she said, "Yeah, that's my grandmother's best friend." I said, "I'm sorry, as in Joseph Mengele?" And she said, "How would you know that?" And I said, "With all due respect, I don't think I'm going to come see your grandmother today." We were in a yoga community at this point, so it had no bearing to, and we were together, but we had no bearing. But I later found out that her whole family was SS,
Wow.
living in Austria, and they found out that I was Jewish, and it was like this whole scene. And I started to look at all the furniture that they had and wondered. Most of it was Christian imagery, but it tore my soul apart.
Look, being that you're mentioning the Holocaust, one of the things that we do mourn over tomorrow on the ninth day of Av is the terrible calamity and uh, the indescribable tragedy of 6 million Jews that were wiped off the face of this earth by
Yeah.
an evil, evil, evil people. First or second or third amongst them, the individual that you mentioned previously. It's a very, very painful part of world history, not just Jewish history. And we have, there are people that try to defame that memory and try to eradicate that memory. And we're fortunate still to have survivors of the Holocaust in our midst. In my congregation, we have a number of them. Our congregation here in the Five Towns area of New York was founded by Holocaust survivors, and it's something that I feel very passionately about, especially after having studied. I mentioned last summer, spending an entire week intensively engaged in Holocaust studies. It's something that meaning the next generation, have to be very outspoken about. Anti-Semitism has to be responded to in kind, and we have to call people out for the hate speech and the hatred. I just saw something the other day that was very motivating. The chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Mervis, sent a letter to Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, basically protesting how these platforms are becoming filters and becoming platforms for hate speech, and how they are not being adamant enough and being passionate enough to eradicate this type of garbage from their platforms and letting it sit there for hours on end before anything is done about it, so on and so forth. So being that we got off onto this tangent, I think it's important just to mention, particularly in the period that we find ourselves in, when we mourn and commemorate so many innocent lives that were snuffed out and taken based on baseless hatred, basically just based on the fact that they were Jews. So I think it's incumbent and behooves us as Jews, and even as non-Jews, everybody has to speak out against all different types of hatred. We can't discriminate against the hatred that we call out
Right.
against.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter, 100%. Jewish lives matter, 100%. Why? Every life matters, and it can't be one at the expense of the other. And that's something that we have to all advocate for and stand up for and communicate as clearly as possible.
And there's so many annihilations that are going on in the world that are around us today. I remember when I was at Hay House, a woman writing a story about the absolute annihilation of brothers and sisters fighting against one another in her town, in a town in Africa, where hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people were being slaughtered. And we sort of have gotten dull to it. I don't know how we can get dull to it. How do we get dull to the fact that people are senselessly being taken from this world? So let's elevate a little from it, okay? Because it's so easy to get caught in the particular situation. And I don't want to lose the particular. But again, I want to come back to that stuff doesn't happen if we were to listen. What do you think? Like, you're about to go in and talk to a congregation about the calamities that have happened to the Jewish people. What is it you hope they will take away from your talk tomorrow or tonight that will reverse the momentum of that rather than continue the momentum by staying victims to that situation?
I appreciate you reminding me that I have to prepare
I know.
some moving words. You're absolutely right. It's something that I have to get working on, because I do hope to share some insight. I like to focus on everything starts from the individual. The word in Hebrew for I is ani. It's Aleph Nun Yud. Aleph in the Hebrew alphabet is commensurate to the number one. Yud is 10, which is a quorum, which is a group, and then you need like the 50 levels of wisdom to bind the individual to the community. But I think as we come together as a community tonight and tomorrow, commemorating this tragic day in our history, so the starting point is the I, is the individual. Right? Every person has to basically take stock and figure out kind of where they can improve individually, and then where they can bring it to their community, and then from there to the world at large. It's a continuum, but you can't skip steps. A person has to ultimately refine themselves, and under the backdrop of calamities and tragedies, I think if there's a message of hope, I've been thinking a lot about hopefulness, and I'd like to try to put some pen to paper and talk a little bit about that message. This coming weekend, we refer to as the weekend of comfort. Meaning after the time of tragedy, we don't get kind of lost in the weeds of tragedy. We try to see the hope and the comfort and that which we anticipate is going to happen, positive things, good things, redemptive things. So I think it's a question of appreciating what we have, appreciating the moment, appreciating that despite all of the tragedies of our history, despite all of the challenges that we are facing in 2020, we are here. We're here. We're having this conversation. We live in the most technologically advanced age ever. Whether they're going to find a vaccine or not going to find a vaccine, but the resources that are being poured into trying to find the cure or the solution is really unbelievable. It's incredible. The resources, the advancement that we have, the resources that the governments are investing and trying to be helpful, that we give to each other. I mean, there's so much good to see. And I think, I don't like to kind of harp so much on, I'm not like a fire and brimstone type rabbi. I'm not like, I don't think that uplifts or motivates or inspires. Mm-hmm. I think the focus has to be on things are not perfect, but they're pretty good. And we just need to do a little bit more to raise this another level, to kind of help open things up. And I think that's the message.
Love it. If I can share one more story, and then we'll let you prepare.
I enjoyed that speed round last time. We're not going to do the speed round.
We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. One of the things that happened for me in writing the Mosaic, and it's the story that I told you. So it is not the imagery of the Mosaic, but the imagery of the Mosaic was really beautiful to me, because it's broken pieces. It's pieces that have experienced a lot of pain. It's pieces that aren't what they used to be. Some are whole, some are broken. It's pieces of all different colors, of all different sizes, of all different shapes coming together. And whereas I love the idea of how things have to start with ourselves, I think there's something also to the idea of each piece of the mosaic is its piece unto itself. But when it's connected to the other pieces of the mosaic, it's much more powerful than it is on its own. Mm. And I think we're losing something in our world today by feeling like only the black pieces can come together, or the white pieces, or the Jewish pieces, or the Christian pieces, or the Muslims, or the Hindus. And it's only when we connect the mosaic of all the pieces together that the world experiences and can feel the pain of every single human being, every single culture, every single nation, every race. And when we allow ourselves to comfort those in pain by just the presence of showing up and being next to them and connecting with them, our world becomes a different place.
Hmm.
And there's something in that imagery of the mosaic that I really like.
No, it's you're describing in Judaism we call it the divine trait of Tiferet, which means synthesis or beauty or glory, which is actually taking this is a more esoteric idea, but taking the sides of kindness and the sides of strictness and integrating and synthesizing them together. They're actually the embodiment of our patriarch Jacob, of Yaakov Avinu. It's something that talks to this idea of synthesis. And that's what I think has been so hard in the pandemic, particularly when houses of worship were closed or have been closed or maybe still are closed in different places across the world. So people miss that piece of connecting with, I know you're talking even broader than within our own religious spheres, but
Yes.
the connectivity,
Yes.
that we need to experience amongst ourselves so that we can bring it to others, that's been missing, and that's been something that I see many people have been struggling with, and it's a great loss. It's a great loss. We can't live in a vacuum. We can't live in a bubble. We need to be part of the human species. We need to have human interaction. Most of us need to have human interaction and get feedback from other people, and that's something that hopefully we'll be able to do more of, and then expand
And
it, grow it.
and when I stand back and look at what COVID is really saying to us, and I don't mean to minimize the deaths and the pain and the suffering, but it's showing us the level that we've separated ourselves by keeping us isolated and alone. And until we get to the place where we include each other in our world, it's showing us how painful for some people that separation is and the isolation is. And it's time for us to really just embrace the world. You said it most beautifully: when the father looks down at his children having disagreements and not getting along with each other, there's pain there.
Right.
And so that can be within the silo or it can be without silo. Okay, let's do the round that you liked. It'll make it fit into the rest of the show. I wanted to make it a little different because we had already done it. Um, Dog or cat person?
I
Which
thought
one
you'd
are
ask
you?
me some new questions. You can ask me some new questions. It's fine.
Okay,
Dog
okay,
or cat? Neither.
neither. Um, let's go in the box or out of the box because your answer was interesting.
I think I'm in the box. I'd like to think I'm out of the box. I'm probably in the box.
What would it mean for you to be out of the box? Because you, with all due respect to you, I know you all of about 18 minutes now.
So I think when we spoke last time, I shared with you kind of this dichotomy of the rabbinic persona
Yeah,
and trying to, kind of the cool kid or the cool guy that I was growing up, driving that with the expectation of the rabbi. Oftentimes my wife will say to me, you can't do that. You're a rabbi. Like,
yeah,
I'll be like, why can't I do that? This is who I am. And that's kind of like the in the box, out of the box. I mentioned to you that I love to play golf, for example. I find it to be very tranquil and very, very, it's a very, very fulfilling experience for me, and trying to improve my game. And I don't put enough time into it, nearly not nearly enough to be, adequate, but I'm pretty naturally athletic. So I'm decent, could certainly probably be better. But the idea of kind of, uh, that's not a rabbinic thing to do. And how do you dress and how do you carry yourself? So I don't like to see myself as like just a typical rabbi. I'm
yeah,
not, I go to a rabbinic meeting, all the other rabbis are dressed in suit and tie, and I won't come like, I don't think I'll come like dressed completely inappropriately, but I'll stand out because
yeah,
I won't be wearing the traditional garb. So
yeah,
that is a little bit of a rebellious streak in me in terms of, but I won't do that all the time. Like, it depends where and when and what the context is. But I find that as I get older, I find that I have more and more of that desire to differentiate myself and
yeah.
to not just kind of fit into a box.
I
Which is,
love that.
some people love that, some people hate that. It can be polarizing. Some people, I have people in my shul who, like, they'll be in my synagogue, they'll be like, well, you don't fit into that rabbinic model. I have a hard time relating to you. And other people love it. They think it's the coolest thing ever. So
Yeah,
it's I don't want to say it's polarizing, but it's not for everybody.
yeah. But even the thought processes you have, I've been around a lot of Orthodox Jews in my days. Um, there's a dogmatism to some of the orthodoxy doesn't matter. It's not limited to Judaism. It can be in born again Christians. It can be in Hindus. It can be in Muslims. You may have that, but I don't feel it in our conversation.
I, I think the way to differentiate is like there may be rigidity or dogmatism in personal practice in certain ways.
Yeah.
Flexibility in terms of the belief in the immutability of the Torah and God's wisdom, and therefore there may not be flexibility in certain realms, which, as we talked about offline, can be very painful. But at the same time, that's for me and how I want to live my life or how I want to practice. But I don't impose that on other people. Meaning, it's not my place to judge or impose that on my congregants or on other Jews or other people. Everybody has to live there. You know, I said this to my wife yesterday. We were talking about something. I thought it was great. I just said to my wife, I was sharing with my wife about somebody else we know, and I was telling my wife, I told this person, "You do you." We think it should be this way. You think that way. You do you. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to do you. You know, it's not. I don't get to tell you how you get to live your life. That's between you and God, nobody else.
And so, dogmatism or religion? Where do you sit?
I don't really know how to explain those categories. Sorry, it's not clear to me what those options are.
Are they the same?
No, I mean, religion is much. I mean, dogmatism is not a religious concept. It's just a person can be very dogmatic about a myriad of things. I can be very dogmatic in my passion for the New York Yankees, for example. I'm not a Yankee fan, but I'm just saying, one can be dogmatic about a multitude of different things. It's just a strident personality on some level. Religion also can mean a multitude and array of things to different people. So it's impossible for me to answer that question. Am I dogmatic or I don't know what to do with that one. Sorry.
Are you, in the scope of religion, are you religious or spiritual?
You're not done. I see. Okay, you're going deeper.
I want to go deeper because I want you. You asked me to ask you different, quick, lightning questions. I got to ask them to you.
Am I religious or am I spiritual? So I'm religious in my practice, meaning that I have certain dogmatic or religious aspects that I do day in and day out that are really not something that I would choose ever to pass up on. At the same time, there are aspects and components of that are spiritual uplifting. There are aspects of it that are just done because they're supposed to be done. I haven't merited yet to taste the spirituality in them. So I think that answers it pretty decently.
Talmud or Zohar?
I spend more time studying Talmud, but I definitely appreciate the more esoteric parts of the Torah as well. But day in, day out, my diet is more Talmud, more the corpus of the revealed study as opposed to the esoteric study.
So just so you correct me if I'm wrong, Talmud is the oral law that was given to the Jewish people to explain the written law, which was the Torah. Yeah. And Zohar is the mystical teachings of Judaism, which a lot of the rabbinical traditions that I learned say you have to be 40 years old with at least 2 kids before you even sit down with the Zohar. So you're grounded in this world because
I heard the 40 years old. I never heard the 2 kids, but that could be that's accurate. It's certainly we believe all the Torah was given at Mount Sinai by God to Moses, but we also believe that the more esoteric parts were revealed by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the great Tanaic people that we find in the Talmud, that he basically revealed it at a certain point in Jewish history. It wasn't necessarily revealed when the rest of the revealed Torah was revealed.
So there's a saying, I don't know if it is still within Judaism or not, but they say if there are 2 Jews on a desert island, there'll be 3 synagogues, one that one goes to, one the other goes to, and one neither one goes to. Inclusive or divisive?
By the way, that statement is 1,000% true. 1,000% true. I think it touches on what I said before. I try to be inclusive, but there are times when I may be divisive. It's not. I definitely do not try to be divisive. But be that as it may, even the most best intentioned of us at times can unfortunately be divisive.
I think there's a saying outside of Judaism that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes.
Right.
By the way, I take pride in that. Meaning, even when I mess up, I usually don't intentionally mess up. So I think that I think that's a win, meaning like even if somebody's upset at you or they don't agree with the way you're approaching something, but good intentions are meaningful on some level. I often like to say that it's not the intent, it's the impact. On the other hand, we have to give ourselves credit sometimes for good intent, or, you know, people may destroy us because you can't please all the people all the time.
Yeah. Um, Law or heart?
So I think last time you formulated more intellect
I think I
versus
said head or heart,
head or
but
heart.
now we're having a very we've segued ourselves into a because I think it's important for people to feel your view of Judaism, because I don't think your view of Judaism is seen very much in the world.
Well,
And
it
I
depends
would,
where you're. It depends where you. I mean, I appreciate it. I don't know who you're sharing this with, but I think it really depends who you're exposed to. A person has to be exposed to the right people. A person has to pick rabbinic leadership that is inspirational to them, and
I'm
not.
talking about any place outside of New York, basically,
Okay.
because okay, because it really East Coast New York, you can find your own place. Like when I was studying in rabbinical school, they said whatever you believe, you can find a rabbi to back it up. So there are rabbinical beliefs that will support most of what you believe.
Correct. They're all different types of rabbis, but I used to often push back if people would, if I've had multiple congregations in my career, and there are always going to be people that are not inspired or motivated by your message. You hope it's few and far between, but the reality is there are people like that. But I would often push back and say, I 100% respect that. But if you're intellectually honest, so there are 15 other congregations within a few block radius of where we are, and they all have wonderful, inspiring rabbis. And I myself personally find them to be very inspiring and motivating. There can't be that there isn't one rabbi in the world or within our little genre of people that would speak to you. And if you're saying it's me, so then be authentic and be intellectually honest and go somewhere else. Not because I'm trying to get rid of you, but go somewhere where the message is going to resonate with you. Maybe like your question, head or heart. So maybe at times in my sermons, I speak more from the heart, and you're more intellect. So go to the more intellectual rabbi, or vice versa. But
Yeah,
a person who basically is looking to criticize, but then isn't honest enough to say it's not really the rabbi, it's really them. They're just not interested, and the proof is in the pudding, because they're not going anywhere else to seek what they're genuinely looking for. They just want to knock things down. They just want to be destructive. So those people are poison. Those people you kind of have to stay away from. In terms of your question about, for me, head or heart, so it's definitely a synthesis. It's definitely I think most people have to hopefully find a balance. If you're all heart, that can cause violations of the law, and if you are all law, you're not going to be able to connect with people. So I think you have to find. My father-in-law was very fond of quoting the famous adage. He would say basically that uh, about rabbis. He would say that if he said it like this: everybody loves you, so you're not a rabbi.
Hmm.
If nobody likes you or nobody loves you, you're not a mensch. Meaning there has to be there's always a balance. So in terms of being a rabbinic personality, so one has to find the balance between upholding the law, but also doing it with a lot of heart. And a lot of the challenge of life is how do you say no? When you have to say no, how do you go about it? Do you do it empathically? Do you do it sympathetically? Does the person feel that you really feel their pain, or does the person just feel like you could care less about them? You're on a power trip basically. So that's a complicated discussion.
I was a monk in a monastery for 10 years, and we had the most peaceful group of guys that you could ever want to be with, until one day a new guy came into the monastery, and he somehow had the ability to get under every one of our skins. And so after about 2 months of being with him, we all went to see the head of the monastery, the head monk, and we came to him and we said, "You have to help us. We don't like this new guy. We're trying our best to love him and trying our best to put our arms around him and respect him, but he's pissed off every single one of us." And the head monk looked at us and smiled, and he said, "You know what? if he weren't here, it would behoove me to go out and hire somebody just like him to join the monastery. Because in what he's showing you about yourself, you're seeing far more than you could ever see from anything that I'm giving you.
Sure, that's very powerful.
So wake up and see who he is, and treat him accordingly. So I love the tension, like even in the congregation, and what that tension's showing. Like, and for me, it all comes back to listening. If we listen to what's happening around us and see it, and get ourselves out of the way.
Right.
You've been so kind and so generous with your time. Let's take a couple minutes and give you the platform. You've said a lot already. But what's something you haven't said that you would really like to share with people that might help them? Imagine this is your congregation today. It's made up of Jews and non-Jews. It's made up of people who are going through their own Tisha B'Av, their own times of suffering and pain. And no matter what their suffering and pain comes from, what is it you would like to say to them that might bring comfort to them, or might bring hope, that might change the momentum of that pain into something just like the head monk of our monastery said, that it would behoove me to go and find them for you? What would you like to say to the people that are your congregation in this show right now?
So I would say two things. I think that if a person is fortunate enough, I wouldn't say like this in my congregation, but in this form, I'll say it this way. If a person is fortunate enough to, I mean, I'd almost be more sensitive in a formulation to a live crowd, but I'm just here, we're talking, just you'll get the idea. If a person is fortunate enough to be blessed with family, with a spouse, with a child, with parents, with siblings, which most of us are in the world, almost everybody has hopefully somebody. I think that is something that, if a lesson I've learned from COVID is just how precious that really is, and not to take that for granted, not to take that all for granted. Yeah. However, with the caveat that there are people that are missing a very crucial piece. I have many friends that don't have spouses yet that really are looking to get married, people who don't have children, so on and so forth. So many challenges that so many people have. So those of us who are more blessed have to be deeply sensitive to those that aren't. And to those that are not yet blessed, I think it's important to recognize that everything has a purpose. All suffering has a purpose. We may not understand what the purpose is, and that makes it doubly challenging. There's a much longer discussion about, why the righteous suffer and why the wicked are rewarded, and how this world operates and the next world, and a much more esoteric and philosophical discussion within Jewish thought. But at the end of the day, I think no matter what the challenge is, everybody ideally has to hold on to the idea, to the mantra that there's meaning in the suffering. There's meaning in the suffering. There's growth. There's meaning. One of my favorite books, of all time is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. Yeah. And how he talks about, even in the depths of despair of the concentration camps and the Holocaust, how he was able to find meaning, and it became a whole, psychotherapeutic model of logotherapy. So I think that message, that there's meaning in suffering, and that we can find meaning no matter what circumstance we have. I think that's the biggest thing in life, is to have meaning. Yeah. If you don't have meaning, then you don't have anything. And the beauty is that you can have meaning no matter what your circumstance. It's just a question, like you said, of perspective and how we see it. It's a question of how we come across the people in the Mosaic. So if I can round it out with your own.
Love it. Thank you. And if I would reshape that, the things that happen to us are not what's important. What's important is the meaning that we give to it. Because the meaning that we give to it will define our experience of it.
That was what I said. That's not the why, it's the what. So that also comes full circle.
I love that. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. I want to thank you so much, Reb Dovid, for coming here. Is there a way that people can get in touch with you? Is there a way?
Sure. So I have a website. My website is rabbidovidmcohen.com. Not David, but Dovid. Rabbi Dovid, Dovid, M Cohen.com. My website is the easiest way to get a to connect with me via email. There's videos of me there. There's Torah teachings there. There's a copy of my book that's available on Amazon, etc. So that's
And the
really
name of your book is what?
We're almost there. Living with patience, perseverance, and purpose. It's actually a great title, and if I may say so myself, it has some good content for these trying times.
Fabulous.
We're almost there.
Get out and get. We're almost there.
We're almost there.
Okay. Reb Dovid, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for those of you who listened. We did record this one. It was even better than the one we had before. You're going to have to just trust me.
I think it was a little bit. I was different, but I think it may have been better. It's hard to believe.
It was deeper and different and better. And for those of you who didn't hear the first one, that was great too, but you got this one. And so thank you for those of you who listened to the show. Please share this with your friends. Please share it around. And until the next stranger comes into the room, have a great day and do yourself a favor. Go up to someone you don't know, whether it's online or in person, and just ask them how they're doing. Do yourself an even bigger favor. Go up to someone you do know or someone you've just met and sit with them again and say, how are you? Rehab the conversation.
I love it.
What I learned from this conversation is that we can only get better and better and better. The more we talk, the more we trust each other, the more we allow ourselves to answer questions and ask questions. And thank you so much for being here. Until next time, we look forward to it.
Okay, Danny. Thank you. And thank you for all you do.
Absolutely. Thank you, brother. Ciao.
Be well.